Hey, how's it going? Mike from LI Flies Mike, and as always, the full list of materials will be down in the description below. Today we're going to be using the Gamakatsu SL12S 4-rod hook that I use a lot on this channel, and we're going to be using some .035 diameter lead wire. What we're going to be doing is building a slight keel on the fly to help it turn over. When tying a fly with perhaps either more material or a larger fly, it's nice to add a lead keel. It not only helps the fly turn over properly, but it also helps cut through the wind and give it a little weight, which actually makes it a little bit easier to cast. Something that we'll be describing in a future video. But all I'm going to do here is cut 3 pieces about 1/2 inch long, making sure I leave some room by the hook eye, and I'm just going to tie them in side by side all at once here. And kind of loosely wrap them to start, and then what I can do is flip it over and get an idea, making sure that the lead wire is evenly distributed on the bottom, ensuring that the fly will turn over properly. So today what we're actually going to be doing is doing a little bit of a mix of some Squimpish hollow fly tying and a mix of a Johnny King's Kinky Muddler. So using a little super glue here, we're going to put some super glue onto the lead wire here just to ensure that this is going to be nice and durable. And then after taking a piece of package from your fly tying material, I like to just spread that around so it dries quicker. Then I'll just cover that with some fly tying thread. So next we're going to build some support for the tail of the fly, and kind of taking a note out of Johnny King's book here, we're going to spread some of this material around so it's 360 degrees around the hook shank instead of just being tied on top. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build a Kinky Muddler style tail. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our hackle and just 1 or 2 light ties here. We're just going to, just enough to kind of secure it down. We're going to make sure that the hackle is tied in at a 45-degree angle. This is called tenting your hackle. So essentially we're going to create a pocket underneath the hackle that the water can catch and cause some great movement in the fly. So next up, taking this old light blue Keo patch, I have some feathers here that can work, and all I'm going to do is strip the point of the hackle to where I kind of want to tie it in. I don't mind if it's somewhat bushy or stiff, because this will help fill up that back section of the fly. But we're looking for these triangle tapered feathers, and the whole idea is, again, we're tying them in that tented angle so we can create that pocket underneath the hackle, giving us that movement. So I'm kind of opting to go for a mullet color here, as you could tell from the title of the video. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some silver Flashabou here. And again, trying to be minimal with our thread wrapping here because we don't want to cinch down too hard on the feathers, causing them to flare and ruining our tented profile. And staying true to this mullet color, I like kind of blues and whites. And of course, gray is a classic mullet color. So we're going to take some gray hackle and we're going to tent this right on top as well. So if you do end up wrapping too tight, it will pinch that hackle. So it's something to be very mindful of. All we need to do now is kind of pinch the hackle and keep it in the tented position that we like. And then we can wrap down nice and tight and secure that. And then what you do is you take your scissors, and we're going to try and cut this as neat as we can and trim up all the quill of the hackle. The reason why we don't trim that and then tie it is because it's harder to get that tented profile when we don't have those pieces sticking out. So last here, we're going to take some pearl Flashabou and put this on top. So we have a couple different colors of Flashabou that we're working with here. And again, whenever I tie my flash, you generally see me just take it and loop it and then put it over the hook shank and tie down. Unless I really need the flash to be, let's say, 10 or 12 inches for a big bunker fly, then this is how I usually tie it. So next, again, this is something that I've started doing a lot with non-flat wing hackle tails, essentially, is taking your thread and wrapping it underneath the hackle and then in front, and doing that 3 or 4 times. It's going to help kind of prop that hackle up, and it's going to stop it from fouling as easy. It's also going to make sure that we have that nice tented pocket underneath to give us that action. So we'll put a little super glue on there to ensure it's durable, and then we can start building our hollow section of the body. So taking some Squimpish hair here, this is some of their Squimpish hair blends, and it already has angel hair mixed in, which is very nice. I'm going to take some of this, and after taking a lot of the shorter hairs out, essentially what I do is, because it's quite long, I'll take it, I'll cut it, and then I'll cut it in half again, and then taper the end so I get this nice natural look. Pull all the shorter hairs out. And I'm just going to replicate that with a darker color on top. We're going to go with the light blue. And something that I'm going to do here is actually take some white and tie it on the inside of this light blue. Because whenever you're tying hollow flies, essentially, you can start with a darker color as your first tie, and then put something lighter on the inside if you'd like. Because when you fold it back, that lighter color will be the first thing that folds back. So you can get this nice transition of colors with hollow ties. Traditionally with the roosterfish muddler style, which is what I tie a lot, that Johnny Cadence has some videos that people have filmed at fly tying shows. He takes marabou and ties that facing back, or wraps the marabou. What we're going to do here is we're going to take some marabou, strip it off the quill. We don't need too much either, just enough to kind of help fill in that barren area that we're going to have on the inside of the hollow tie. And we're going to tie this inside of our hollow. And now what we can do is just fold this back, and we'll have that nice white marabou kind of filling in that void that we have in between the hackle and the hollow tie. So taking whatever sort of push tool you have, or just a spare spool of thread is generally what I use. We're going to weave our thread through the material, trying not to catch any of it. And then I'm going to pull this material back, and you're not tying on top of it. You're essentially building a dam of thread in front of the material. Now you don't necessarily need too much, but you can work that thread to get more of a flare, less of a flare. Essentially, the more thread you have, the less of an exaggerated flare you'll have, for instance. And the Squimpish hair does react differently than bucktail, so there's something to that, you know, bucktail generally seems to flare a lot more, or it has a lot more stiffness to it, so you might not even need as much thread to get the profile that you're looking for. But after brushing this out so I can get a little bit more of a realistic look of what's going on here, we're just going to build our thread dam up a little bit so I can control the flare on that material. So now we could just move forward ever so slightly, and we're going to tie another hollow tie here. Trying to find the right amount of ties depending on your hook shank. We want to leave enough room to do our Kinky Muddler head. And it only takes about 3 or 4 ties to build up a nice looking Kinky Muddler head. So we should have enough room here after one more hollow tie. But I'm just adding Squimpish hair enough to where I see fit. It's a fine balance of having enough hair to where you get a nice hollow tie, to also not trying to put too much material on there to where it makes the fly tough to cast, for instance. It's the same thing with a natural bucktail hollow fly. Sometimes less is more. But I still want the fly to push water. You know, a mullet in particular always throws a wake when you see them swimming, so I did want to build it up somewhat to where I could have at least enough material to where this fly is going to be pushing water and a fish could pick up on it with its lateral scale. So now for the top colors, this is our last hollow tie here. So we're going to be starting with some gray color to start, some gray Squimpish hair. And then I'm just going to be adding some purple and some blue Squimpish blends. And this already has some flash mixed in. So the gray is going to kind of be the darker color once we fold it back. And all I'm going to do is spread that material around evenly to where it's kind of, I want that gray to be evenly spread on the top, and these lighter colors to kind of be more on the centered, if you will. Kind of manipulate the material as you work with it, making sure that it's spread around to where you like it. And then what we're going to do is, again, taking a small amount of some white marabou here, we're going to tie this on the inside just to kind of give us something to fill in the area in between our hollow ties. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our thread and we're going to fold it back here again, weaving our thread through the push tool, whatever push tool you like. And now what we can do is, you see I'm kind of manipulating the material to making sure that it's spread evenly and pulling it back so I can get a nice clean tie with my thread in front to start building that dam. You can see it, depending on the sort of profile you want to go for, you could tie a bunker fly with this stuff. We're going for a little bit more of a slimmed down profile, so I could build up that thread dam a little bit more as I see fit. But if you were tying like a large pike fly or a bunker fly, you could obviously, you can make a smaller thread dam, so that way you have a much more flared profile. Kind of a much larger profile. Now the one thing is though, we need to be careful with our thread here. Because we're tying the Kinky Muddler head now, we're going to be doing V-ties with some Slinky Fiber, or you could even use SF blends for instance. But the main thing about tying the V-ties here is we want to use a minimal amount of thread wraps when we're doing this. So just keep that in mind as you're tying your V-ties here. So what we're going to do though is, I have some gray Slinky Fiber and I actually have some leftover, I guess, blends that I've made in the past, just mixes of different colors, stuff I grab off the table because I don't want to throw it away. And I'm just going to mix this in here so we get a little bit of flash. There's a little bit of blue and olives, but you can kind of just mix your own blends how you see fit. So now on to our V-ties. Now I want to kind of start right up against the previous hollow tie, and you really don't need a lot of material. After tying almost like 1,000 of these things last season, I've learned that it's a fine balance of having enough material to where you can get that nice Kinky Muddler head, but if you use too much material, you're just going to end up trimming a bunch. So this seems to be the kind of amount that you're trying to tie with your V-ties, where you'll get a nice full head to trim, but you won't have too much material that you're wasting. It's going to take time after tying a couple to kind of get the feel for how much material, and it also depends on whether you want a big bulky head or a more trimmed down head, right? But all we're going to do here is tie this material directly in the center and offset it at an angle, and then flip the hook upside down, do that again. And when we fold the material back, we're folding it on the opposite angle that it was offset, and then we're just wrapping on top of it. So you've seen me do V-ties many times here on the channel. If you haven't, check out, we have a ton of different fly tying videos, but very simple process, and it's a way that you can build a 3D profile on a fly, and it's a great way of building a head on a fly that you can either trim, or if you manage to tie the material at the right length and the right amount, you don't even need to trim it at times. But it's much easier to take your scissors afterwards and manipulate the head and get the shape of the profile that you want. So again, here we're just going to move ever so slightly forward, trying to keep our ties pretty tight in between. You can move, you know, a couple millimeters or so, but you don't want too much of a gap, especially because you're going to start seeing the gaps in between. Now, the main thing is about this fly is you don't want to start the head, you know, halfway back or even further. You kind of want to start the head about 2/3 of the way up. So that's one of the secrets to the Kinky Muddler as well, is that you don't want to build the entire body of, you don't want to build the body or the head on the entirety of the shank. You don't need to, because of the way that we tie and V-tie the material in. And what I'm going to do is, normally I would have a couple different bunches of material, some shorter bunches to tie as I'm moving forward, but because this is just a one-off fly, I just cut the Slinky Fiber at the same length, and we're going to be trimming it anyways. So now we're doing our last V-tie here. So we managed 3 V-ties, and we didn't end up with a lot of space here, you'll see, but we're just going to fold these back. Again, offsetting at the angle, and you'll see every once in a while when I'm done V-tying, I'll spread that material around with my thumbnail. The way that you finish this fly off, you can see I'm trying to pack this here, get a little bit more room, is we're going to do a kind of pseudo hollow tie, if you will. Essentially kind of like a mix between a V-tie and a hollow tie. I'm just getting this material, making sure it's spread around evenly. And then what we're going to do is, for this hollow tie, we're going to tie the material kind of almost directly in the middle. Sometimes you can go a little bit more 60-40, 40-60, vice versa. And all we're going to do, we don't need too much material either, just enough to kind of get a nice basic veil. And what we're going to do is we're just going to spread this back kind of just like how you normally would do a hollow tie, and then weave your thread through. So I'm going to use my push tool here, making sure that that gray color kind of stays on top and that white stays on the lower half of the belly. Now normally what you do is you just wrap in front, kind of like a traditional hollow tie. I ran out of some room here, so I decided to actually wrap on top of that gray a little bit. And that's okay. Sometimes you could do that. You could see the material was kind of almost offset a little bit. So I'm just going to wrap on top there, just making sure that it's secured and it doesn't flare too much when I trim it. One thing to note is you don't want necessarily like a giant thread beak or head on this fly. So I probably could have done a little bit of a cleaner job if I managed my spacing, but you'll see in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's all just a matter of trying to get the fly to where you want it to be, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to brush the fly out, and we're going to focus, there's a lot of synthetics here. So taking your brush and brushing out the material, making sure that none of the material is kind of trapped underneath itself. Spread the hair around as I see fit. And what we're going to do is, after brushing this out, now we can actually start trimming the head of this fly. Now it's important not to trim too far past the Slinky Fiber, because we'll start cutting into our Squimpish hollow ties. But essentially it's very simple to trim the head of this fly. You essentially just pinch it in between your thumb and your index finger at an angle, and you can kind of use your thumb and index finger as a guide. Obviously be careful not to cut yourself. But you can use the angle in which you're holding it and use your thumb, essentially kind of use the angle of your thumb and your index finger to guide it to make sure that you don't cut too deep. And usually what I do is I start on top and bottom so I can get that material to where it's not protruding past the hook point or the bend of the hook, because that'll cause it to not swim properly. And then on top, making sure that the material doesn't stick too far up, right? Afterwards, then we can flip the fly on its side, and I like to kind of lay it on my palm, and then I'll just take my scissors, angling them outwards, and ever so slightly kind of just start working the material on the side. Helps having sharp scissors. My whiskers are starting to get a little dull here, so I'm going to need to sharpen them up. But essentially what we're doing is we're just slowly taking some material, and this is where you can decide what sort of profile you're going for, whether you want it to be a big, like a larger head, kind of what we're going for here, or something a little less exaggerated and more like a sardine profile for the rooster fish. And you can see pinching the fly here helps getting the top and bottom profile together, because we are going to be gluing eyes on here. So there's a couple steps to the trimming. I usually trim them about, there's this stage, there's after we glue the eyes on, and then after we glue the head. But you can see here now we kind of have a nice basic mullet profile, or a larger Pacific sardine profile. And what we can do now is we can put the fly back on the vise, again brush it out so we can kind of see what we're working with as we're tying the fly, and we can glue the eyes on here now. So for gluing the eyes, it's pretty simple. We're just going to be using some 3D eyes here, whatever size you like. I don't remember exactly what size these are, maybe 5/16 or something, or 3/8 perhaps. And we're going to be using some E6000. Now you can use Loctite Liquid Seal, I believe it's called, but E6000 I get at the local hardware store. I've been tying commercially with it for years. And what you're going to see, what we're going to do here is we're going to be using liquid fusion on top of this to make sure that it's extremely durable. But the way I use this is pretty simple. I take a small dollop, I put it on the back side of the eye. Then what I'll do is I'll spread some of that glue where I want the eye to be. Then I take a little bit more, put it on the back side of the eye, and then I'll push the eye down into the glue, and then I'll push the eye back. And what that does is that makes sure that the glue spreads completely across the back side of the eye and then kind of fuses into the material. And if you need to, you can clean up any with your bodkin. I just use my finger here. And try not to touch the actual 3D eyes, because then you'll get this sticky E6000 on it. So making sure the eyes are lined up properly, top and bottom and side to side. What you want to do is you want to let this sit for about an hour or two. And then probably in about 15 minutes after gluing them, you kind of want to squeeze the eyes back together, like an hour later, because it will expand slightly. But after that happens, we can kind of do our almost really final trim here that matters, because what we're going to do is we're going to apply some liquid fusion over the eyes and a tiny bit of the material itself. So this is where we want to make sure if there's any extra material, if we want to significantly trim something here to maybe make sure, for instance, I'm going to take some extra white material off the belly just to ensure that the fly is going to turn over properly, and I don't want that material sticking too far down. So now taking some liquid fusion, this stuff is fantastic. Again, shout out to Johnny Kins. I started using this for pretty much all of my 3D eyes, because I found once I started putting liquid fusion on the 3D eyes, the chances of them falling off after significant fishing use went down drastically. Like the eyes stay on there like a year now, as opposed to like 2 or 3 days of fishing hard, right? Usually the hooks will rust before the eyes fall off. So I'm just going to take a pretty healthy amount and put it over each eye. The whole idea is you want to spread the liquid fusion completely around each eye and having it ever so slightly just touching the material there, so you kind of get a full 360-degree coverage with this liquid fusion. Now, it is important not to have too much of this stuff spread around onto the head itself. We are going to have a little bit spread up, you can see here on the gray, and some on the white on the belly, but you don't want to go too far back with it. The way I like to think of it is maybe kind of moving back to about middle of the eye at most. You don't want to build like a really stiff head. You kind of just want to make it to where just the front section of the head is stiffened up, and it helps give us this nice kind of bullet-shaped head that's going to help create that water flowing over the head and then hitting that pocket in the tail and all that squimpish hair. And after letting this dry for a day or so, this is still wet, but I always recommend letting it dry for a day before you fish with liquid fusion. You can see here my take on Johnny King's style of Kinky Muddler, but with Squimpish hollow ties. So it makes a great mullet fly. You know, unfortunately I haven't seen many mullet in the surf or anything. I fished a ton this year, still haven't caught a striped bass since about mid-October, which is pretty bad, but we saw a ton of mullet in the bay. So generally in the fall we do get a lot of mullet in the bay, and the striped bass will eat them, but I really miss the days of seeing mullet in the surf and having bass and bluefish crush them right in the wash. So unfortunately it's not something we see that much here on Long Island anymore, or at least not my local beaches. But anyways, this is a fantastic fly. Of course, you could use it for not only for striped bass and bluefish, you could use this for tarpon or snook. There's a ton of mullet down in Florida. You could take this fly and again tie it in a larger, this could be like a larger sardina style fly for rooster fish, giant trevally fly if you tie it in darker colors like black and purples and reds, right? So all around just a fantastic fly, and by taking a fantastic material like squimpish hair, we can just kind of mix this fly up and create a much larger profile that really is a fish catching fly in general. So shout out to Johnny Kins for creating such an awesome kind of profile and platform that we can create amazing flies from. Well, my name is Mike from LI Flies Mike. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry for a slight delay. We've been a little bit slower with the videos, but we've been wrapping up our fly tying season here. I've been fishing as much as possible, trying to get as much footage as possible of surf fishing. It's been a very slow fishing season for me though, so we're gearing up. We're getting ready to start getting heavy into fly tying for the winter. I'm going to be tying rooster fish flies, so we're going to be doing a ton of different fly tying videos and discussion videos here on the channel, and I'm going to be working on some longer in-depth videos for discussions about fly fishing and tactics and things like that. So well, thank you so much for watching. Again, we have a ton of different fly fishing and fly tying videos here on the channel. We have live fly tying on Friday nights, and we have early access videos for members. And shout out to our members. Thank you so much for the support on the channel. It really means a lot here. Well, thank you so much for watching as always. Till next time. tight lines.